Good afternoon. Welcome once again to another edition or episode, I should say, of B&B Hockey Talk. I'm Aaron Bloxall with my co-host, Matt Balzer, and today we continue our top 10 list, ending the week with the goaltending position. This was obviously very tough, just like the other lists. And I want to remind you to like and share us on Facebook. Share your top 10 with us or your comments about today's show as well. Make sure to subscribe and leave your comments on YouTube if you prefer. Hundreds of people are watching us. We absolutely love bringing this to you guys every single day during the week. And just a quick reminder, in case I forget at the end of the show, we'll be back on next week on Tuesday, since Monday is a holiday in both Canada and the U.S. So before we get into it, we have a signing in the NHL. Matt's going to bring us up to speed with that.
Yeah, so late last night, the Calgary Flames signed defenseman Noah Hanifin to a 6-year extension worth $29.7 million. It's a $4.95 million cap hit. And with that, the Flames have all their key defensemen signed for at least 2 or more years. I think Hanifin 6 years, Giordano 4, and Brody and Hamnick and Stone at least have 2+ years left on their contracts. But I think the big thing with this contract is this sets the bar for the remaining restricted free agent defensemen still unsigned, with Darnell Nurse, Shea Theodore, and Josh Morrissey being the remainder RFA defensemen. So it looks like those guys will be aiming around for that $5 million mark now that Hanifin is signed. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see where those other defensemen, if they can finally get their deals done, as training camp's just around the corner here.
Yeah, well, it's good to lock those guys up, and we still have some UFAs up front as well, so it'll be interesting to see how this all dominoes into effect now. But well, let's get into our goaltenders, and today you get to lead us off 10 through 8 as we count down to our number ones, and we'll post them, of course, for you to see and comment on. And why don't you start us off?
All right.
Let's see how similar our lists are today.
Yeah, so this is probably the toughest list for me, being a goaltender myself. There's a lot of goalies that I like in the NHL, and this list could have been different on any given day, depending on how I felt like. But what I went with, starting off at number 10, San Jose Sharks #1 goalie Martin Jones. I think this guy doesn't get talked about enough about how good of a goalie he is. He had 30 wins in 60 games last year. Went 6-4 in the playoffs before they got eliminated by Vegas. But he had a 9.15 save percentage during the season and a 9.28 save percentage in the playoffs. This guy's been pretty consistent between the 30-35 wins since he's got traded to the Sharks. He led the Sharks to the Stanley Cup final just a few years ago before losing to Pittsburgh. But this guy is really calm in net and very solid. But yeah, one of the more underrated goalies, I think, in the NHL. My number 9 from the Boston Bruins, Tuukka Rask. I've never been the biggest Tuukka Rask fan, but over the years, he's been one of the most consistent goalies in the NHL. Last year, he went 34, 14-5 in 54 games with a 9.17 save percentage. And then in the playoffs, he still hasn't really shown that he can play consistently in the playoffs. I know he had the one run to the Stanley Cup final, but he does have his ups and downs in the playoffs. But with Boston, and he's still relatively young, 31 years old, and he'll be their franchise goalie for many years to come still. And my number 8, his counterpart that he played against in the playoffs in that first round from the Toronto Maple Leafs, Frederik Andersen. Andersen, I am a huge fan of. He's very athletic. I still think the Ducks should have kept him over John Gibson, as I've said many times in many other videos. But last year he had 38 wins in 66 games. but he burnt out in the playoffs. He struggled in a few games, but I think a big thing coming in this year is to get him a few less starts, playing in 66 games. If you can get them down to around 55 to 60 games, where we see it with a lot of the number one goalies now, they're sort of getting teams don't like to overplay them, and if they do, I think Anderson can keep up that consistent play throughout the year. But yeah, he's one of my favorite goalies in the NHL to watch.
All right. Well, I'm not going to disagree with any of those because they're all very good, although one of them is not on my top 10 list, but I wanted him to be. So that was North Vancouver's very own Martin Jones. He actually cracked my number. He was my number 11. So
yeah.
My number 10 is also Boston goaltender Tuukka Rask, only because, like you said, he hasn't been able to get it done yet in the playoffs, but he's pretty consistent year after year. And Boston, I'm sure, still loves having him in net, so they can thank the Toronto Maple Leafs for him. My number 9 is one that may not be on your top 10 list, but I had to include him only because his numbers are just every year they seem to be really good. So Anaheim Ducks goaltender John Gibson is my number 9. 31 wins, 18 losses, and 7 overtime or shootout losses. 2.40 goals against average, 921 save percentage, and 4 shutouts. For a Ducks team that can play pretty scrambly at times, he seems to hold the fort down. If he can stay 100% healthy for a season, I bet you're going to see some really good numbers out of him as it continues. He does, I think, have a really young defense in front of him, as well as he's still pretty young, so there's some good upside to him in the future. My number 8 is also Toronto Maple Leafs goaltender Freddie Anderson. What can you say about him? He plays on a team. I noticed his save percentage was a little bit lower than most goalies in our top list, and his goals against is the highest out of anybody in my top 10. But he plays on a team with absolute holograms for defensemen. So to put up with that, he gets a lot of run support, so his wins are still pretty good. But his numbers, considering how bad the defense is in Toronto, are still pretty good and still better than most goaltenders in the NHL. So that's why he's my number 8, and I think he's only going to get better as Toronto hopefully solves that dreaded defense that they have. And I always talk about Jake Gardiner as -6 in Game 7. I felt bad for both Anderson and Rask in that playoff series because the offense was absolutely incredible and the defense was almost non-existent. So that's my top, my 10 through 8. My number 7 pick is from the Minnesota Wild, Devin Dubnyk. 35 wins, 2.52 goals against average, and a 918 save percentage. Finished the season with 5 shutouts, and every year this guy, no matter what team he's on, seems to put up some numbers. Once he was acquired by the Minnesota Wild, he seemed to have found a home there as he's become their number 1 goaltender. And with the style that Minnesota plays, this guy's going to continue to put up great numbers. But when you watch Minnesota play, he doesn't just put up good numbers. He does the job for them and is absolute brick in the net, especially with the system that they play. Counting down my number 6 as we get into what I would think is going to be probably closer to the list, but I don't know for sure because we haven't shared the list. So this guy had a great playoff series. Winnipeg Jet goaltender Connor Hellebuyck. 44 wins on the year. That was tied for first in the NHL. 2.36 goals against average and a 924 save percentage, along with 6 shutouts. Hellebuyck came out of nowhere to win the starting position after Steve Mason started the year very poorly for Winnipeg. Hellebuyck has one of the weirder goaltender warm-ups, I would say, as he sits on the bench and does the weird things with his eyes. But it works for him. He was solid throughout the playoffs, and unfortunately, I think his team just ran out of gas when they played Las Vegas. he's going to be an absolute stalwart in that for the Winnipeg Jets going forward in the future. He's young, he's big, and I think he's going to get even better yet. So he may climb up the list starting next year. My number 5, as we move along, is Nashville Predator goaltender Pekka Rinne. 42 wins last year, 2.31 goals against average, and a .927 save percentage. 8 shutouts, tying for first for goaltenders. And Pekka Rinne, I think his numbers are going to probably be even better this year based on the defense that Nashville has. Their top 6 defensemen are absolutely crazy. And, his defense isn't just good. I mean, he provides the saves when he needs to. And basically Nashville, first place team in the NHL last year, the curse of the President Trophy, knocking them out when they played the Winnipeg Jets. But that was number 1 and number 2 seed in the entire NHL playing in the quarterfinals prior to the conference matchups. And they just basically ran into a hot Winnipeg Jets team. And Pekka Rinne played phenomenal in that series, but they just couldn't get enough pucks past the previous pick that I had, Connor Hellebuyck. And so Rinne, it's tough because I know he could potentially be anywhere in that top 5, but he's my number 5. What do you got for us, Matt?
All right, yeah. So John Gibson, even though I'm not the biggest fan, I did have him ranked at number 14 on my honorable mentions. And Devin Dubnyk, he just missed out on my list. He was my number 11. So
okay.
Even though I think with Dubnyk, I felt really sorry for him in that series against Winnipeg. He actually played amazing in that. It's just that Winnipeg was just so good, and he got like basically next to zero goal scoring support in that series. But yeah, that going on Dubnyk, I think he's one of like the greatest, like you could say resurrecting his career when he was with Edmonton. And then getting traded to Montreal, like his career, his numbers were terrible. He was sent down to the American Hockey League, and then he signed with Arizona, and he started to get his game back a little bit. And then Arizona traded him to Minnesota, and then he just took off from there. He's been nominated for the Vezina Trophy. He won the Masterton Trophy in 2014-15, which was really good. But yeah, to get to my guys, my number 7 is Connor Hellebuyck from the Winnipeg Jets. Yeah, as you said, 44 wins in 67 games. Just crazy. I think the Jets were thinking that he was still going to be another year away from becoming that number 1 goalie. That's why they brought Steve Mason in. But after Mason basically crapped the bed in the first game, he just took that number 1 role and never looked back. But yeah, the Jets finally got that number 1 goalie that they needed. And he's only 25 years old, so he's going to have many good years in front of him. My number 6, this could be a little low for some, but I have Braden Holtby as my number 6. I think the only reason why he is a little bit down, because outside of winning the Stanley Cup, his numbers during the regular season weren't the greatest. Even though his record was 34, 16-4 in 54 games, but he had a .299 goals against average and a .907 save percentage, and he didn't have any shutouts in the regular season. But in the playoffs, of course, he went 16-7 at a .922 save percentage, a 2.16 goals against average, and 2 shutouts. But this guy's regular season numbers, his record is crazy. In 361 games, he has 225 wins, only 89 regulation losses, and 35 overtime or shootout losses. So it shows how consistent he's been in net for Washington ever since he joined the team. And he won the Vezina Trophy in 2015-16. So if it wasn't for that regular season being a little bit down, this guy would be a lot higher on my list. But yeah, he finally took Washington to the Stanley Cup, and he had that miraculous save.
The save.
Yeah.
That was the turning point of the whole Stanley Cup Finals.
Yeah. And then my number 5 is also Pekka Rinne. This guy won the Vezina Trophy finally this year. He's the oldest goalie on this list at 35 years old. But yeah, 42, 13, and 4 in 59 games, 8 shutouts, 927 save percentage. Just crazy good numbers. His playoffs are sometimes a little bit interesting because at times he can just stand on his head, and then other times, like in Game 7 against Winnipeg, he got pulled out of the net. I think the one thing I will be interested in seeing, I think he will still be the number 1 goalie, but their backup goalie, Juuse Saros, this guy appears to be like he'll be a future number 1 star goalie. And with Rinne being a UFA at the end of this year, I think Saros is really going to be pushing for starts this year. But I think Rinne will still be the number 1, and he's still an amazing goalie. But that's an interesting situation to keep an eye on this year to see if Saros can outplay Rinne this year. Getting into my number 4 now, from the Vegas Golden Knights, Marc-Andre Fleury. I've always been a huge Fleury fan from his first year in Pittsburgh. And those bright yellow pads.
Yes.
All that year. This guy is probably like the best goalie personality out there. He's probably the most outgoing out of all the goalie personalities. Usually goalies are pretty laid back and quiet. But Fleury, he's usually pretty out there with all the stuff they did. But yeah, going from Pittsburgh to Vegas, went 29, 13, and 4 in only 46 games, had a 927 save percentage and 4 shutouts. And in the playoffs, his save percentage and shutouts were the exact same as he had in the regular season, just coming up a bit short. He has over 400 wins in 737 games. Just one of the most consistent goalies, 3 Stanley Cups, and he's been to the Stanley Cup final 5 times in his career, which is crazy. And only one of those Stanley Cup runs he wasn't part of being the starting goalie. Even though I would have liked to have seen when he started the playoffs, so when Matt Murray got hurt, I would have liked to have seen him go all the way, which I thought would have been actually pretty cool for the one year where Fleury played the entire regular season, got hurt for the playoffs, and Murray played all the playoff games. It would have been cool if the exact opposite happened when Murray got hurt and Fleury took him all the way, but Murray took over in the conference finals. But this guy's the backbone of Vegas. I think the first 3 playoff rounds is some of the best goaltending I've seen in a very long time, just consistently in the playoffs. But yeah, he's just one of those number 1 goalies that you want to have in the net. And my number 3 from the Los Angeles Kings, Jonathan Quick. This guy is one of my if not one of my favorite goalies to watch in the NHL. He's a workhorse, 64 games, 33 wins, 921 save percentage, and 5 shutouts. And he got swept in the first round while having a 947 save percentage, 1.55 goals against average, which you look at those numbers and you say, how do you get swept with being that good? But yeah, all those games were 1-goal games, either 2-1 or 1-0. So it really sucked for Quick just to put up those numbers. But yeah, you talk about consistency over every year. Even the year before where he got hurt and was out for most of the year, that basically took LA's chances of making the playoffs completely out of the fold. But this year, being healthy, he got them back into the playoffs. And the guy's flexibility and his ability to scramble and get to that puck is amazing to watch. As I think this is he's probably the most athletic goalie, I think, in the NHL.
Braden Holtby, I wanted to get into my top 10. Had a great Stanley Cup playoff. He was going to be right near the 10th. He was actually my basically right there with Martin Jones. He's like my 11th, my 12th. It was hard to keep him off the list only because of what he's done. There's several other guys off the list that have had success regular season and playoffs. And unfortunately, somebody has to be left out of our B&B Hockey's top 10 list. So I am basically just like you. My number 4 is Marc-Andre Fleury from the Vegas Golden Knights. You've already touched on a lot of his numbers and a lot of the reasons why I like him. Just absolutely had an amazing year last year. And he's always been good playing on a good Pittsburgh team. But taking a expansion team as far as he did is just absolutely remarkable. And that whole team bought in from day one. And with Fleury, when healthy, as the backbone, you could see how much better they were with him in net versus some of their other goaltenders that they had throughout the year. So my number 3 is also Los Angeles Kings goalie, Jonathan Quick. One stat you didn't mention is he was the leading scorer for goaltenders last year with 4 assists. Not that matters, but Jonathan Quick, that series between Vegas and Los Angeles, we've talked about it a few times on this show, just absolutely unreal on how tight checking it was, and to put up the numbers that he did in the playoffs and still not get a single win is just mind-blowing. But his numbers through the regular season were great. It wasn't the best season he's had, but I think the Los Angeles team's getting better in front of them, even though they are getting older. They have added some pieces, and I wouldn't be surprised for him to continue to put up those great numbers because he is a great goalie to watch. So now we get into our top 2 picks. So my number 2 from the Columbus Blue Jackets, Sergei Bobrovsky, 37 wins last year, 2.42 goals against average, .921 save percentage, and 5 shutouts. Playing on a John Tortorella team. This guy, when he's healthy, absolutely makes a big difference for that Columbus team. The last 2 years, anyways, Columbus has had really good regular seasons, and because of that Metropolitan Division, they always seem to fall short in the playoffs. But if you were playing Pittsburgh or Washington every single season in the first round, it would be a pretty tough way to get anywhere in the playoffs. So he's very consistent since he's come in the NHL. Philadelphia, for lack of consistency in net, must be kicking themselves for letting this guy get away and trading him. He's carried the Columbus Blue Jackets the last few years and will continue to do so. He's just one of those guys that puts in a consistent effort every single game, every single year. My number 1 shouldn't be a surprise. This guy had a really big breakout season last year. From the Tampa Bay Lightning, Andrei Vasilevskiy. Is it Andre? I think so, yeah?
Yeah.
All right. 44 wins. So, again, he tied with Connor Hellebuyck for most wins in the season. A 2.36 goals against average, and a .924 save percentage, and tied for number 1 with Pekka Rinne with 8 shutouts. If you haven't seen the best regular season save that I've seen in a long time, go ahead and YouTube the save that he makes off of Anze Kopitar of the Los Angeles Kings from behind the back. It was unbelievable. But this guy, I was pretty skeptical when Tampa Bay traded Ben Bishop to make room for Vasilevskiy because, yes, he's shown signs of potential in the NHL as a backup, but I didn't think he would be able to put up the consistency that he has. And not only has he proved me wrong, but he's done a lot better than I think most people thought he would do as the number 1, playing for that young Tampa Bay team and absolutely helping them along the way. And I think Tampa Bay this year may be due for a good playoff run.
All right. Yeah, so our top 4 are the exact same. My number 2, as Jay Onright would say, Sergei Bobrovsky. He's probably, if not, well, as I mentioned, Jonathan Quick, but yeah, all these top 3 are probably my mainstays for watching goalies and trying to imitate my game off of. But yeah, Bobrovsky, he's won the Vezina Trophy twice, which in this NHL day and age is really tough to do. Usually you get your one Vezina win, and they try to make sure every other goalie sort of gets recognized each year. But yeah, he's done it twice. Ever since he got to Columbus, this guy's been a workhorse. He's been that backbone for Columbus. But yeah, as you mentioned, for the playoffs, his numbers have not been great. Unfortunately, he's gone 5-14 over his career in the playoffs. And if you really think this year, all they had to do was win that double overtime game in Game 4, and we'd be talking about a whole different situation where Columbus would have been up 3-1 on the Capitals instead of being tied 2-2 in that series. But Bobrovsky is always is one of my favorite goalies. Another highlight from Bobrovsky, if you haven't seen his 2-on-0 save against the Detroit Red Wings in overtime last year.
Yeah.
One of the greatest saves I've seen, other than that Vasilevskiy save. As you mentioned, as he is my number one goalie, Andre Vasilevskiy. These Russian goalies, man, when they get into that NHL, they usually climb up that list to the very top. But yeah, I think Tampa Bay's primed to win the Stanley Cup this year, and Vasilevskiy is a huge part of that. The 44 wins in 65 games. I think in the second half of the season, he struggled a little bit. I think a big thing was trying to get him rest in the second half, because if it wasn't, I think, for that second half or the last quarter drop off, I think this guy would have won the Vezina Trophy over Pekka Rinne. But I think with that little drop off in the last quarter of the season, that made him lose out for the Vezina. But I think this guy's the prime candidate for the Vezina Trophy this year. And at only 24 years of age, this guy is going to have a heck of a career in front of him.
Awesome. Those are top 10 lists for goaltenders. Matt, why don't you touch on a few of your notables, and then I'll finish up with some of mine, and we'll wish everyone a great weekend.
All right. Yeah, so my honorable mentions, as I brought up earlier, Devin Dubnyk was my number 11. My number 12 was Ben Bishop of the Dallas Stars. When he was with Tampa Bay, he got them to the conference final, and he got them to a Stanley Cup final. I think the biggest thing with Bishop has been those lingering leg injuries. Being so tall at 6'7", it's sort of been of a downcast in his career, where he's played super good well, and then he'll have some sort of groin injury or hip injury, and that's what plagued him at the end of last season, and that dropped Dallas right out of the playoff contention for that last wild card spot. Also, Corey Crawford of the Chicago Blackhawks. Amazing season before he suffered all the vertigo and concussion symptoms. But in 28 games, he went 16-9-2, a .929 save percentage, and 2 shutouts. And if you think Chicago's season probably could have been a whole lot different where they finished if he was healthy, because once when Crawford went down, the goalies they had was the carousel of Jeff Glass, Anton Forsberg, and Jean-Francois Berube.
And the emergency goaltender.
Like, you could say their emergency goalie was probably their best goalie. And he only played probably half a game or whatever. But that is still a crazy situation to play as well as he did, and against the Winnipeg Jets. Out of all teams, that is one team that you wouldn't want to go net against. And then my number 14, John Gibson, as you brought up earlier. And my number 15 I have is Henrik Lundqvist as my last honorable mention. I know last year wasn't his best year, but with all the fire sale at the trade deadline that the Rangers had, he still had a 500 record at 26-7. But yeah, this guy's been probably the most consistent goalie over like the last 13 years, even since he first entered the league. This guy consistently puts up 30-plus wins. I think only twice in his career he's been below 30 wins, and one was the lockout shortened season and this year. So at 431 wins in his career, this guy's done everything but win that coveted Stanley Cup. But it'll be interesting to see if he wants to stay with the Rangers, which it looks like he does, being the king in New York. He's probably one of those goalies that you'd like to see win the Stanley Cup. But it doesn't. It looks like that time has passed for him.
My notables, Braden Holtby, we touched on, Stanley Cup champion. North Vancouver's very own Martin Jones from the San Jose Sharks. My other three that I had was two-time Stanley Cup winner Matt Murray out of Pittsburgh. He didn't make my top 10 only because he still needs to prove himself through a regular season, not just the playoffs, as I think he tends to have some up and down moments during the regular season, and he needs to be a little bit more consistent. But with him winning 2 Stanley Cups and having 2 great playoffs, that's the reason why he's there for me. Of course, King Henrik is also on my list. Definitely a down season, but the Rangers team had a fire sale. And, when he's done playing professional hockey, I'm sure he'll get a professional modeling contract somewhere. With that Swedish background, those guys tend to make good models. So I know he already does some modeling in New York, and it's a pretty big deal there. A lot of people know who King Henrik is. So.
Well, his hair never moves. It always stays in the place. He'll play a hockey game, he'll take his mask off, and his hair is still perfect. It's pretty crazy.
And finally, my last notable, this guy had a really rough season last year. But I think I've always thought the last 4 or 5 years he's had an absolute garbage team in front of him. And if it wasn't for him, they wouldn't have had any success at all. Absolutely carries his team from the back end. And just unfortunately this year, the team continuing to get worse and worse. And so much is expected of him. And he got hurt the year before. And he's had a few injuries now the last couple of years. But Montreal Canadiens goaltender, Carey Price, who I still think is Canada's best goaltender, but he's going to have some absolute competition next time there's international play going on. But he is somebody I couldn't leave out of my notables only because of what he's done. I mean, there's definitely some other goalies that we missed, guys like Corey Schneider, Roberto Luongo, just to name a few, Mike Smith in Calgary. Edmonton fans might be all upset about us leaving Cam Talbot off the list, but who comes to mind, Matt, that we may not have touched on there?
Yeah, well, I think Semyon Varlamov with the Colorado Avalanche is another name. He had a great season in Colorado, but he's sort of been up and down over his career because I think that first year that Patrick Waugh was there, he had an amazing season, and then after that he just dropped off. But last year he finally got back to where he was. I think an underrated goalie in the NHL is Antti Raanta of the Arizona Coyotes. In 47 games, he had a .930 save percentage. Because if you really think about how bad Arizona was when this guy was healthy, he was that backbone, especially in the second half of the season. I think Arizona was actually one of the better teams in the second half. It's just that people didn't really talk about them much. But I think Raanta, if he stays healthy, he does have the numbers, and with the up-and-coming defense that he has in front of him, guys like Ekman Larsson, Jacob Chychrun, and Jason Demers, Nicholas Jarmelson, I think they got a lot of good pieces to help him out in front. Is just getting that consistent offense up front. But if Arizona continues the way they finished last season, he could be a surprising name that comes up this coming year.
And I also think Craig Anderson, just an awful team in front of him, had a great playoff series a couple of years ago, is going to be a forgotten guy only because of how bad Ottawa has become. As well, another guy had come to mind. I'm just trying to think of who it was now.
There was also Keith Kincaid with New Jersey. That'll be an interesting situation between him and Schneider. Where Schneider had all those injuries and inconsistent play, and Kincaid carried them into the playoffs and started over Schneider in the playoffs before Schneider took back over for him as he struggled. But that was against Tampa Bay, so it didn't matter who was going to be in net in that series.
Yeah.
They were going to lose.
And two goalies to watch that now I remember what I was going to say is Carter Hutton as well as Jake Allen. It'd be interesting to see what they do with Buffalo and St. Louis this year. So anyways, that was our show for today, guys. Once again, remember to leave us your comments. Comment on your top 10, or if you want to comment on our top 10 list, remember to do so. Remember to like us on Facebook and subscribe to us on YouTube. This is B&B Hockey Talk. I'm Aaron Bloxel with Matt Balzer, and we will see you, because of the holiday, we'll see you on Tuesday of next week. So everyone have a fantastic weekend and be safe.